Hey guys, this is Supernova TCG, and today I want to do a deck profile on my Katakuri deck that went 5-0 on Thursday Night Locals. 25 applicants, and I went 5-0 with Katakuri. So this was the winner card that I got, and let's get into the deck profile. So first off, like any yellow deck, we have our 2Ks. We have the Streisons, Sanjis, and the Puddings. And for the Streisons, these actually do come in very handy when you're against Zoro or any type of deck that has an early aggression. Mainly Zoro, and you really want to hit the buggy with this. This is actually a very good card to do so. Mostly what do I discard, you ask? Against Zoro, you usually want to discard Brûlés, anything that are 4K with trigger, because most of those cards are cards that you usually tend to counter with, and you don't want to be deploying them. So if you see them in your hand, you just throw them out for this ability to try to kill those early swarms. Next up is Sanji. Sanji is actually very good for early game. If you don't see your 1-drop Pudding Searcher, you want to put this out if you have the evens, if you're taking evens. So this gives you a early card advantage, but you do want to watch out for Marcos in the deck. Specifically, it was against Whitebeard, but now Whitebeard is actually, we'll have to see what happens because Whitebeard is pretty much dead. But it's still a very good card, 2K nonetheless. Pudding is the one that you would less likely put out into the game on your 2-Dawn turn, but she is still very useful because of the 3K body, right? So again, any early aggression, I would still deploy this against Zoro, against any deck that I feel like are trying to develop a wide board. I will still put this out. Try to contest the board, because you want to get those characters out and have your opponent swing at these characters rather than swing your life. This way, you want to protect your life as much as possible before you drop your big mom to lock in the game, right? So these are the 2Ks. Pudding here is the searcher, one of the best searchers for the deck, and it also has 1K. Very good. You want this basically when you go first to be able to search, or any kind of time when you have an extra Dawn sparing around for you to be able to search your high cost characters or anything that you need. Next, we move on to anything that spawns. So one of the best ones, and I think clearly one of the best cards in the game. Even though this card has no counter, this card, when it gets KO'd, replaces itself, and it's a trigger. And basically, because you get to look at 3 cards, you can search for your late game cards, search for 2K counters, anything that you really need. And specifically because this deck doesn't really have such a great mid-game strategy, right? If you have 2 in your hand on the 6th Dawn turn, you drop 2. This is extreme pressure against your opponent, so it'll be able to contest for board basically. So we are playing the play set like most decks are. That's why we're running 3 or 4. Next, we are going with Charlotte Cracker. Now, Charlotte Cracker is actually cracked. One of the games that I played against Smoker, this guy hit me off, swung 8K, and I'm not going to block that, right? First attack, and hit off Cracker. And you know what happens from there. Cracker is going to get to take basically 2 life from them, or they literally have to pitch a good amount of cards, 2 or more cards, 2-3 cards in order to save their life. So we have Charlotte Cracker, trigger. Then we have 4-drop Charlotte Smoothie, also trigger, coming from life. And you really don't use her ability until maybe end game. You really need to push for game and you grab that 1 card. But most of the time you are not triggering her ability. She's just the 5K body that you want to be able to hit off trigger. So you're playing as much as possible. And right now I have the space to put 3. So that's why I've chosen 3 to make space for this next card. So this next card is Brûlé. So Brûlé, his ability is one of the best for now until OP03 comes out, and Sanji has basically the ability, you still have to discard a card with bigger body, right? 4 or 5. But this one, when you draw her in your hand, unless it's the mirror match or unless it's towards at the end of the game where you're playing against black and they don't really have a hand, you never want to drop this card, because most decks now, they have red deck specifically, like Marco, they have a lot of cards that can take care of this card, right? Black can extremely pop these cards off. So the reason why I have 4 is because I want to maximize the trigger and hopefully see this in life when I activate my Katakuri ability and then put it on the bottom, right? That's one of the best options. If it is in your hand, like I mentioned, you can actually pitch this for Streisand in the beginning if you want to throw and kill a 1-drop. If not, then basically she's just acting as a 1K, because most of the time 3-Dawn to drop this blocker is really not not worth it unless it's the mirror, or you know that your opponent has a hard time getting rid of the blocker towards endgame. Most of the time, just pitching it. Next trigger is Shirahoshi, and I'm only choosing to play 3, and I found that 3 is actually the perfect number. You really just want to hit it off trigger like Smoothie again, and basically the decision between playing 3 and 3 I think is a good ratio. For this card, it's half and half, right? When you see her in your hand, you really use it as a 1k, or you just pitch it again for Street ability. But if not, then if you hit it off life, this is the Graceful Charity of the deck. Basically, draw 3 this card too, really good. And when your opponent don't clear this, even though it might not seem optimal against certain decks like Law, if they have a huge board, especially with like cards that have weaker stat, putting 2 Dawn and swing with this sometimes is a move, right? So it's also a body. So you always have to consider when you have cards that come out of trigger, how you utilize them, even though this thing has 0. And it might not be optimal swing with it, but certainly certain turns it can come up. So next I have playing here 3 Charlotte Opera. This is really to contest with Whitebeard. 4/6 is really good. Like I mentioned earlier, this deck doesn't really develop a mid game unless you hit off your triggers really well and get your 4-5k body, 4-drop 5k bodies out. If not, this is kind of your best like 4 Dawn turn, or even on your 6 Dawn turn, you can do this as well. If you have this and Pudding, you basically use your Katakuri ability, take a peep, but then you drop them, right? You drop Pudding, search, drop Opera. So that would be your 6 Dawn. So not bad at all. So we have that, and also 1k counter. Next, we're playing 2 Charlotte Lynn 7-drops. Deck wants to go second, but if your opponent gives you first and you have to take odds, this is one of your best options, right? So 7/8 is nothing to be frowned upon. Next, we are playing, in my opinion, one of the most busted cards in the deck, Charlotte Katakuri. Charlotte Katakuri at I choose to play 3 copies because 4 is probably very bricky. There's argument that you want to run 3 7-drops and 2 8-drops, but because the deck wants to go second, you want to run 3 of them. I've chosen to run 3 of them. I've been very comfortable running 3, no problem. So 3 is the way to go. And the way you use Charlotte Katakuri is specifically you set up a Brûlée early, and you feel like you could take the damage if you know you have an 8-drop coming. If your opponent hasn't cleared this, when you drop this and you pop Brûlée back in life at the bottom, and it's not against yellow that can manipulate life, it would be very troublesome for them. You hit for 1 life, and then Brûlée comes out, they hit again, and you block, so that's 2 free counters. Again, also you can couple that with Shirahoshi as well, do the Graceful Charity shebang all over again. Another one your opponent might not expect is actually to pop anything back in like any one of these, because then you can trigger them again. Sometimes it seems suboptimal, but the reason why you're doing that is if you're already ahead and you already swung with a 5k character, you know next turn they're probably going to try to rid of them, right? But if you drop your 8-drop and you put them back in life, they're going to come back out and they're going to be ready again. They're going to be ready to attack next turn. So acts as a very good aggression card. So it's offensive and defensive strategies to play the 8-drop. Finally, of course, and last but not least, we have our 4 Charlotte Lynn 10-drops, the most busted card in the deck, because when you play this, you are that much further ahead. Sometimes it does save your life, but you really have to consider when you're dropping them and is it the correct time. Sometimes you hit 10 Dawn and you might not get the opportunity to play it because your opponent has put you in such a position that you can't. But when you can, and when you do, and you drop multiple, you win the game. It's really powerful. And then we move on to our events, and in this case, I'm actually only playing 4. I've chosen to go with 2 Thunderbolts. So in the past, I've tested many iterations of this, and 2 is the most comfortable to be with because it's very rare that you actually want to play this from your hand unless you're playing against Whitebeard and they're dropping Marco to protect their life. And when you know you have game, but only 1 blocker is preventing you from winning, you drop the Thunderbolt, KO the Marco is exhausted, you go in for the kill. But if not in the other cases, this is in your hand, you just want to pitch it, right? You pitch it, you discard it for a trigger for Streisand ability again, or you just pitch away as 1 card, a dead card for Shirahoshi, anything that requires pitching. So obviously you want this to come off life, but that's why I'm playing 2. The last 2 cards are Ikaku Sovereignty. This card, when I first read it, I felt like it was really busted. It was really unfair. 2 for 5 power. But your opponent can always play over it. They understand this card. They see this card. They always try to squeeze the value out of their Don, and they're not going to be swinging for any more than they need to. But this card, sometimes your opponent will have to play around. Mostly, this card is actually in for the trigger. In the tournament that I played when I went 5-0, I actually never used this card. I drew it, but I never play it from hand. But there has been one turn, I think I did bluff it because I did not need the extra Don. So it was actually kind of nice to see this like psychological factor of having this card, making my opponent think that I had this card. And so next I'm gonna move on to matchups. So the first round, I played against Rob Lucci, and it went very smoothly for me because my opponent was playing a version where he has Spandam and he had brand new. And when he played Spandam, he actually milled a bunch of his navy. So he ended up having, like, we went over the game after I won. He ended up milling all of his like late game cards. It was very difficult for him to come back from because I would just be dropping bodies on the board and pressuring. The hand that I started with, I remember after Mulligan was pretty cracked. It was either going to go really good or really bad for me. And from as soon as I see that I could take the board, I took it. It was really good because the hand I had was 2 Parasparrows, 2 8-drop Katakuris, and 2 Charlotte Lilians. Now, I had no counter in my hand, right? But the fact that I had 2 Parasparrows means that on my 3rd turn, 6th Don turn, I double dropped Parasparrow. And that kind of really put the pressure on him. And from there, like, I actually had the board, and then from there, after that, 8-drop came down, 10-drop came down, won the game. So that was my first round. For my second round, I played against Law. Now, I played on the sim many times, and I know the Law is the most difficult matchup against Katakuri. I've practiced many times, and almost on the sim immediately, you know that that deck is a value-producing machine. What you want to do is play resource. I was just playing a resource game with him. I was counting constantly how many cards he had in his hand and how many he could produce, because you know that the red-green Law, once he has 5 characters, pay 2 Don, return a character, drop the 5-drop Law, return another character, or play another character. So you want to be very careful in taking care of his board before giving him more cards. Meaning you don't want to swing into his life too early to give him more access of cards in hand and more option to play with. There was one turn I remember that he deployed the 5-drop Law. I already had a pudding up and I had an 8-drop, and he knew it was coming because I searched it from pudding. And he was almost damn sure that I was going to drop the 8-drop. To drop the 8-drop, bounce this Law because that's a problematic card back at his life. That seemed like the right move, but the move that I chose to go with was, instead of dropping the 8-drop, which would actually put more pressure on his side, and return the card and give him back life, because I didn't want him to have that Law. I chose to attach all my Don to pudding and swing into the Law, knowing he only had 2 cards in his hand. He wouldn't be able to counter out and kill this Law that way. And when he had 3 cards, he wouldn't have enough to be able to pull off the leader ability. What I almost thought I misplayed was, because the game dragged on so long because I was playing a resource game with him, that we actually went to the time. So then it was like he was turn 0, I was turn 1, then he was turn 2, and then go back to me 3, and then if he had higher life, he would have won, right? But ended up it was actually very perfect because I already developed the board. By the time it went back to me on turn 1, I was able to swing, clear his board, and swing in his life, and then leaving him with 1 life. At that time, I had no life, but then I dropped Big Mom, and then now I had 1 life. And from then, he took his turn 2, and he couldn't finish me on turn 3. I killed him. Just swung in after that with all my guys. So that was game 2. Game 3, surprisingly, in game 3, I play Kuru, the Ace Blue leader. Yeah, that game, after knowing the leader ability and knowing that it was trying to rest cards and such, I was just basically playing a resource game again. I was just attacking all of his guys on his board, making sure that he didn't have more than 1 character on the board. He had to spawn more characters, and it would have been devaluing for him to actually exhaust his characters to use the leader ability multiple times. Then from then on, once I was able to scale into late game, in my opinion, this deck is amazing in late game. The best deck to play late game. Once you can save your life until you hit that end of pinnacle of late game, then you basically are in the clear to drop your 8, drop your 10, and then go and win the game from there. And then I played Smoker. I think me and my friend, we were talking about it, and we thought that actually in this format for OP03, Smoker would have been a good option. And because of the fact that there's a lot of one drops that are searchers around, right? There's Nami, Izo, Pudding, Spandam. There's so many one drops that kind of enable Smoker to be kind of like a pseudo Katakuri, being able to have a 7k swing, and that's very taxing against the player. So I played against Smoker, and you could say fortunately or unfortunately, I actually didn't deploy Pudding on my first turn, and that's because I didn't draw it. And maybe if I drew it, even if I drew it, I still would have played it, I think, to search out my cards. But because I didn't draw it, he never got that value. And that was the game that I just kind of hit off my life really well. He was able to swing for 9k, and Cracker came out. Cracker came out, I didn't counter out of that. And Cracker came out of life. And kind of, he had no Don up at that point. Back to me, I just swung with Cracker with a good amount of Don. That made him not want to discard cards, and he just took 2 life. And that leaves Smoker with 3 life, right? And as long as I am able to contest board and protect my life very heavily, I'm already at the advantage. And then I think from there, I swung again with, later towards the game, I swung again, so leaving him 2 life before Big Mom comes down to finish the game. And that game again was out-resourced because he had to use, at one point he played Garb and Sakazuki discarding cards, and it just wasn't optimal for him to do that against cards like Paraspero, or even cards that just came out of my trigger, my life trigger, right? Because I never really spent Dawn for them in the first place, and he had to kill them from cards from his hand. So in the 5th round, I played Rob Lucci. This player played really well. He was really good. It came down kind of to the wire, I felt, but in the end, it was between he having the counter in hand or not. And from my observation of knowing 2-drop brand new, he searched Garp instead of taking, we kind of ran it back after and discussed, and instead of taking the Shigi 2k, and that's kind of what tripped him up, because he didn't have a 2k, and the whole time I knew that he had a Garp in hand, and that wasn't enough counter for him. I just kind of went in, and that game was the game that I also hit Shirahoshi, the Graceful Charity Mermaid over here. That really helped fix my hand as well. I threw away all my Brulés that game. I didn't use Brulés for blockers. Most games when I play against black, I really don't keep Brulé cards like Brulé. When I see them in hand, they're just counter bait. I just throw them away for counter. But yeah, I was able to seal the game with a 10-drop Big Mom coming down to end the game after Shirahoshi came down and helped me fix my hand. So that was really good. All the games, I never actually deployed the 7-drop Big Mom. That was the one change that I had before. Before I was actually playing through 3 Peckhams, and I think it was 3 Peckhams. So before it was 3 Peckhams to contest mid game, because the deck didn't really have a mid game. But I want to change things up and try out Shirahoshi as well. So I just decided that if I were to take odds, I'm going to try to hit the 7-drop Linlin instead and try to get the Graceful Charity going. So this is my deck profile, and I went 5-0 with it. And I got the recent news that Whitebeard is dead. He just got hit, right? And that was just a Thursday night at locals. I went 5-0, and then Friday morning, really early, I think like 1 a.m. or something like that, it was announced. I was checking the Facebook community, and Whitebeard got hit. So that's gonna change the deck up a bit in terms of the tournament and regionals coming up and how I'm going to be playing this deck. And I think the changes I would want to make to the deck is to tech against Zoro. Clearly, I don't see that much of a reason to play the Opera 4/6 anymore, because if Whitebeard can't protect life, there's no way, and I probably do not need to play the 4/6 to try to contest against Whitebeard anymore, because the 4/6 stat was mainly because it's a huge body that has 6k that can actually swing into Whitebeard leader, right? So I see that maybe I should take these out for the 3/5 actually, because the 3/5 is rate way better, because now even if I have even, I'll have an extra Dawn to put to Katakuri. Or if it was a 6 Dawn turn, I can drop 2 3s like a Paraspero or a Peckham, or double Peckham, or double Paraspero. That puts a lot of pressure against Zoro. So I think that's what I would do. Another change I think would be to potentially take out 1 Katakuri and go with 3 7-drop Big Moms, because if you face against Zoro, there's a high chance that you actually could consider going first. And I know that the deck wants to go second, but if you go first, you're the one swinging in first. So they might get a card first because they probably will take a card first early. They won't counter. That's just how Zoro play, but that actually matters in the long run of the game because now you are the one attacking, you're pressuring first. So why I say I want to play the 7-drop first more so than the 8-drop now is because cards that are like problematic before the 8-drop could take care of. One of the best cards that Katakuri could take care of is if Isho comes down, right? And Isho only comes down when you kind of slightly misplay and hold more than 6 cards. But if it does come down, you drop the 8-drop, bounce the Isho back on the top of their life. You give it back to them. By the time they have it, they don't want to play because it's late game and you have less than 6 cards. But now if I'm playing Big Mom Charlotte Linlin 7-8, that also means I'm saving a Dawn. And this ability is really good because you literally force your opponent to choose. You want to trash a life or you want to add one to my life. And that also, it's kind of like a -1 for your opponent because almost Zoro doesn't really have enough juice to contest in the late game, and it knows that it has to take his own life instead of giving you one because it's very dangerous to give an extra life to yellow. The next change I would make if I were to do that, so here I would make maybe 3 7-drop Big Mom will come to the change for this deck. These will probably come out and I would probably replace them with a 3 5k Peckham Vanilla Beater here. And then I'm looking at Ikaku Sovereignty. Ikaku Sovereignty is a 5k counter, right? But Zoro only swings mostly for 6k attacks most of the time. And this is almost like an overkill, in my opinion. Maybe I might cut one down or maybe take it out completely and play something else, like increase the Sherry Hoshi 1k. And I'm looking at maybe another Smoothie, because Smoothie coming out of life, any of these guys coming out of life puts a lot of early game pressure and it's really good. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. So 4 Smoothies, 4 Sherry Hoshis. And there is also an argument to actually completely cut this guy, or maybe even leave him for 1. But I actually like this guy too much to cut him to 1, or even take him out of the deck. So I'll just go 3 7s, 2 8s, 4 Shirahoshi 5s, and then this is the 3 5 Peckhams. So yeah, so that is my deck profile. Is there something that everybody could take away from my explanations of the deck and how I chose to build it? So yep. Thank you, and until next time, this is Supernova TCG.